Xion wasted no time. He drew his sword and changed to a sandy whirlwind that blew toward Skorth. Skorth swung his blade at the oncoming mass, now 4 times its normal size and white hot, and sent a wave of heat that cut Xion in half. Xion materialized and fell to the ground screaming in agony. He lifted his head up to look at Skorth still coming at him and turned once more to sand. "Oh no you don't!" Skorth yelled as he plunged his sword into the ground, turning all the sand around him to glass. This sword harbors the power of the desert sun, forged of the best scorpion steel, and fed the hottest flames. I will slash that sliver of steel you call a blade, turn you into glass, and shatter you fox. The desert sand began to shift and the wind picked up again. The glass around Skorth burst into large shards and a huge sandstorm began to brew. "Coward!" Skorth screamed to the sky. "You think you can blow out the flame of the Sun King?" Xion focused all his strength on moving the sand and making the wind move as fast as he could. He shrouded everyone in sand and came at Skorth. Sparks erupted as their blades met, and Xion could feel the heat radiating from Skorth's blade, changing his sand to glass and slowing him down. Sententia's sword never showed any sign of yielding to the Sun King's blade. Xion kept changing from sand to solid, making jabs at Skorth, but never managing to introduce flesh to metal. In a rage, Skorth thrust his blade to the sky, shouting, "Sun, grant me your flame, and turn my enemies to ash." There was a blinding flash of white light, and as it dimmed, the scorpions and Xion's oncoming pack beheld something no one had ever seen before. An entire sandstorm turned to glass from the ground to the clouds. Martera watched on, cloaked within the masses, holding their breath and waiting in awe of the column of glass. The sounds of cracking filled the air as the sandstorm began to collapse under its own weight, and giant shards of thin glass rained down and shattered on the desert below. Skorth stood tall, his body lightly charred from the heat of his sword, glass sticking out of his back, shoulders, face. And accepting his victory over the foolhardy fox, he turned to his men and raised his sword in a show of strength. As he began to walk away, the glass behind him began to stir, and Xion pulled himself out from under it, gasping desperately to catch his breath. His entire body burned. He could feel it all over, every nerve ending, screaming in agony. He was bleeding and covered in long, shallow cuts from digging his way out of the glass, but he realized, despite the temporarily overwhelming pain, that he was fine. Skorth turned slowly toward the sound. He could not believe what he was seeing. "What are you?" he demanded as Xion used his sword to pull himself up out of the glass and shards began digging into his feet. Xion walked towards Skorth, shaking the glass from his hair and using his sword as a crutch. "Come on then," Skorth said with a nervous smile. "Come to your death, fox." Skorth screamed in frustration. He could barely move his arms, so he thrust his sword to the ground to steady himself and let his tail fall out. Xion advanced slowly, now seeing the determination in Skorth's eyes. "Stop this now and we can both live," Xion shouted. "I would rather tear my own heart out," Skorth replied. So Xion came at him with one final desperate lunge. Skorth made a jab for Xion's chest with his stinger, and Xion's sword pierced Skorth's heart just as his stinger slipped through Xion's sand and Xion materialized behind him. Skorth dropped to his knees and Xion fell on his face as the two titans' legs buckled. For a moment Xion thought he might lose consciousness, but once again he found himself regaining strength instead. He crawled to Skorth, rolled him over and took his sword. Then he pulled his own from Skorth's chest. He held them both high as he faced the shocked crowd of scorpions. "Let it be known. I am Xion, devil of the sand, wielder of the sun's flame." He paused and scanned the hardened scorpions. He could see their warrior culture in their faces, each one peppered with scars. "I name Martera your leader from this day until her death. And I want the mark of the scorpion burned into my chest to honor the death of Skorth and in recognition of my scorpion heart." The scorpions cheered at Xion's request as Xion and his hunters came into view. A feast was held that night in Xion's honor and to commemorate the joining of the scorpions with the fox and wolves. You did well, Martera whispered as she sat on Xion's left with Xion to his right. Xion's chest still burned from his scorpion brand, but he walked among his newfound people bearing it proudly for all to see. They were nervous of each other at first, but as the men and women began swapping tales of their daily lives, and the wine began to flow, the tense atmosphere was lifted. Let us take your sword to our smiths. We can fuse it with my father's. Make it better suited for a man, for a king. Martera offered as she admired Xion's slender blade. Later perhaps. Xion replied, not believing that Sententia's sword would benefit from the procedure. Enjoy the celebration, please. Both of you. In 2 days I want you to march to the cliffs in the south. What about you, Xion? Xion asked. I have some more business I have to tend to. Xion turned to a pillar of sand and vanished. Does he always do that? Martera asked as one of her babies crawled over her shoulder. So serious, so focused. Yes, he does. Xion replied as he took a sip of his mead. So what made you choose to follow him, Wolf? Martera asked as she looked out over the crowd of hunters teaching each other their traditions of celebration and trading battle stories. He has a soft spot in his heart for mutts like me. Xion replied. Martera smiled and wondered to herself if she knew Xion's secret as well. What about you, Scorpion? Forgive me if I seem forward, but where I come from we do not pledge our allegiance to the man who killed our father in battle. My father was a bloodthirsty tyrant. He was cruel to his people, and in addition to committing the dragon sin, he killed the father of my brood. Martera shifted her gaze from the crowd to Xion now. I suppose I should thank him for his cruelty. You see, scorpions are born warriors. She took a drink and continued. Normally scorpion mothers eat the weakest of their children. We have so many at a time it is just not practical to keep them all. But since my father killed my love, I have come to treasure each and every one of my brood. I can sympathize with Xion and what he wants for his son. That is why I chose to follow him. Because I know what it is to want to protect the reminders of the love you have lost. A small glowing scorpion crawled down Martera's right arm and into her palm. She raised it up to look at it eye to eye and smiled before kissing the top of its carapace and tucking it back into her breasts. I want to believe it is better to build a world for our children than to fight the wars of our ancestors. I see you survived your ordeal, Jack said as Xion materialized in front of him. What did you do, Jack? That was moth magic that saved me from Scorth's blade. If the scorpions find out, they won't, Jack replied. There are 7 people that know. You, me, and the 5 moths that came together to keep you from being burned to a crisp. I found the Desert Moth clan like you asked and made them sympathetic to your cause. A small orange moth flitted into the center of the room and changed into a tall, slender woman with long orange locks. Xion, my name is Lunera, and it was my clan's magic that saved you. Xion felt the fear and skepticism in Lunera's eyes as she stared at the brand on Xion's chest. Please don't make us regret this. I won't, Xion replied with a nod before turning to Jack. Jack, I hope to bring together a council in the southern cliffs in a few days, and I want you to be there. You would have me sit in a room as equals with a wolf, a scorpion, a buzzard, and a hawk. I was hoping the badgers, spiders, lizards, and moths would join us as well. Xion replied, shifting his gaze back to Lunera, who replied with a nervous nod. And if everything goes wrong, Xion, what then? Jack asked. We retreat to the north and I take the cliffside fortress by force. We cannot hold the desert without it, and we lose our wings in the desert. Jack replied. Word travels on wings, Xion, not the winds. I cannot believe I am saying this, but we need at least one of those 2 clans on our side, and because the buzzards are occupying the Hawks' home, I think we would have better luck convincing the Hawks to revolt. I have been told that the buzzards oppress the hawks, but I am hoping we get both without having to fight another battle. Xion replied, and once that is settled I will find the rest of the desert clans and call them to a council. No. If you are successful, send the feathers as your messengers. If you really plan on being a king, you need to start acting like it. Jack replied. Does that mean you really trust me, Jack? Xion asked as he tried to read Jack, who immediately broke eye contact with him, being fully aware of his gifts. Connie trusts you, and Bonnie loved you. Consider me guilty by association. Xion spent the next day with Oliver. He explained to him everything that was happening and warned him of the things that were to come. If you do become king, will Aunt Snow stay? Xion looked to Lily, who shook her head. No, son. Aunt Snow will return to the mountain. If you are king, can't you make her stay? No, Xion replied with a smile. Why not? Oliver demanded, clenching his little fists with childlike fear in his eyes. Because she's my big sister, I can't tell her what to do. Xion whispered in his ear. But never forget, Oli. I will always be your father first. That was 2 days ago. Now Xion stood before the cliffside fortress, a menacing structure with high windows and mahogany-colored stone, and waited as 2 hawks descended on him. You are Xion the fox. The one on the left began. Yes, I request an audience with. We know. The hawks replied in unison, cutting Xion off. Does your sand travel allow for flight, or shall we carry you? I can carry myself. Xion replied as he began to change into sand. How did these hawks know so much about him? Follow us. The hawks replied as they changed and flew back to a balcony high up on the cliffside. Xion blew upward and changed from sand to solid as he reached the balcony. The morning sunlight was pouring into the room, but it was still very dim. The windows were lined with looking glasses, and Xion guessed from their height they could see all the way across the desert to the temple in the north. This and the desert chatter is probably how they knew who Xion was and why he was there. A large buzzard stepped out of the shadows of the room and took a seat behind a huge table. Please sit, he said in a raspy, creaking voice, gesturing to a chair nearby. How may I address you? Xion asked as he sat down. Buse. The buzzard squawked. You're a Xion, the fox claiming to wield the sword of a goddess. I assume you know our reputation here in the desert, and that is why you are here. Buse began. As a tribe that consider themselves to be reapers, the literal wings of death. Yes, my mother warned me about your clan as a child, as I am sure all good fox parents would. Your mother was very skilled in the magic of many clans. A fox from the east, correct? Yes, she was given a gift from the darkness and passed it to me. And you mean to use it to bring the desert together? Maybe even bring back the clans that have left? Yes. Xion could not read Buse fully, only catching small glimpses beyond a dark haze. But he could tell Buse was choosing his next words very carefully. Our hawks have not been able to find a single snake. Until that sandstorm the other day, we thought the Badger clan had found their village. But then there would still be a few snakes here and there, or at least a body or two. Buse stared at Xion's sword, but it looked like he was looking through it. After the sandstorm we knew it was you, and that only Sententia could have granted someone that power. You are followers of Sententia? Xion asked. We believe in many gods, even the darker ones. Agatha came to Xion's mind now. He knew that was what Buse meant, and he began to wonder where she was now. Then it struck him the snakes were her people too. Had she watched him kill them all? Did she care? The question is, what gods will you follow, Xion? Who will shape your destiny and that of this nation you seek to create? Xion thought about it for the first time since he had pulled the sword. There was Sophia, the goddess and guardian of all the wisdom of creation, and the mother who it is said created a garden world for exploration. Trua, goddess of the compassion and benevolence of all creation, and the creator of the vast oceans her followers believed she used to bring forth the first life. Sententia, whose sword he wielded, and holder of the power of creation. And then there was Agatha, the one bound to the nether, whom he had set free. There were people who worshipped both all of the goddesses in some variation or the other, and those that believe in none at all. So he chose the latter. My power will be my own. My rule will be my own. And my people will be my own. You expect to rule as a godless man, as a dragon would? Buse asked as he leaned forward and raised his eyebrow. Until one comes to strike me down, Xion replied.